Greetings, I am Toggle in Hell's Harlequin, but you may call me Tog. First of all, I'd like to say it's okay to be white. Or any other race for that matter. It's even better to be white and Hispanic mixed. Just kidding with that last one. The last video I did was on feminists and their contradictory views on pinup modeling. I figured that would be a good lead into this next topic, which would be slut-shaming. One of the things that bothers me about the term slut-shaming is that it actually covers two very different topics. It can either mean judging a woman for dressing provocatively, or it can mean you're judging a woman for being promiscuous. They both involve judgment, but as you can see, they're actually fairly different topics. Because obviously not all women who dress provocatively are promiscuous, and not all promiscuous women dress provocatively. So let's first cover the topic of judging women for how they dress. Now I know this happens to men as well. Trust me, I've got quite a few goth friends, as well as there's that whole Shirtgate incident. But seeing as I'm a woman, it's much easier for me to address this topic from a female-centric viewpoint. Now, in my personal opinion, I don't think you should make moral judgments on a person because of how they dress. Note I said moral judgments, not just judgments in general, because I think it's human nature to make aesthetic judgments on people based on what they wear or how they choose to do their hair. Or at least it's female nature. What I mean by that is it's perfectly reasonable to expect people to dress appropriately in certain environments, such as occasions and at workplaces and whatnot. But thinking of the person who's dressing provocatively as a lesser human being because of how they dress makes you an asshole. I'm sorry, that's just how I feel about that particular scenario. When it comes to appropriate attire, one thing that does bother me about being female is I don't know if this actually happens to males or not, is what's appropriate for some people isn't appropriate for other people, and that's something that's always bothered me, because to me it's a clear double standard. Now some of the examples I will give are extremely first world, I'll give you that, but sometimes even petty issues can get under your skin. In high school, I got in trouble a few times about wearing short skirts to class. Now the thing is, I was actually wearing these short skirts with thick tights, so you couldn't actually make out any of my skin at all, as well as the fact that other girls would wear even shorter skirts than me, and I even looked up in the dress code and showed that all of my skirts actually fit the code. However, the teachers would tell me because I had a curvier physique, therefore it was less modest for me to be wearing a short skirt than the other girls. I also hate workplaces that have in their dress code that you must dress modestly or tastefully, because it's really up to that manager of the day's discretion, and some managers will say things are okay while others will complain about it and send you home, so it's very, very inconsistent, and I've always had issues because I'm quite busty, and I try and find appropriate work clothes, but trying to find a good button-up shirt for someone who's busty is nearly impossible. I had one person try and send me home once for wearing a black turtleneck dress that went down to the knees. Now, it wasn't one of those super tight ones, in fact it had slight pleating around the waist, so it had a little bit of a flare to it, but she felt that it accentuated my bust too much, so it was too provocative for the workplace. Luckily for me though, the store manager was in that day, and he looked at my outfit and he said, "No, it's fine, it's very tasteful, it looks nice." So you can see how those kind of standards really get on my nerves. The weirdest case of double standards happened a few months ago when I was at the psychiatric facility for a week. One of the nurses took me to the side, and this was her exact wording. Because we have male patients and we have one male therapist that just started working there, if it was a woman-only facility, my outfit would be just fine, but they found that my outfit might be a little too distracting for the males in this facility, which I found to be very odd considering that I was wearing a knee-length dress that had sleeves, had little cap sleeves on it, as well as I was wearing a pair of black leggings, which some of the girls there were walking around wearing leggings as if they're pants. Now I first thought this was just because I was busty, and I'm kind of used to that type of treatment, but what got really weird is another girl entered the facility a few days after I did, and she was even bustier than I was. Well, granted she was also much heavier than I was, so I'm not sure if she was proportionately bustier, but that doesn't necessarily matter. She was walking around with these ill-fitting tank tops that I actually think were camisoles, meaning the little tank tops you're supposed to wear under your clothes, not the ones that you're supposed to wear as clothes. She was wearing it with no bra, her chest was way out there, and she was showing like around 6 inches of cleavage, if not more, and she was wearing leggings as pants. So all in all, I'd say she was wearing a very provocative outfit indeed. She wore those for days without anyone saying anything to her. Finally, I asked the staff at the facility why I was told to cover up and she wasn't, and they explained to me, "Well, she's in her mid-40s. And we think she's just dressing comfortably. We don't think she's actually trying to be provocative." Then the therapist just said something like, it's good to see that you're airing your grievances and not just holding on to things that are bothering you. It's very nice to see someone show their assertiveness like that. So by their logic, they're either slut-shaming me for being too pretty, or they're saying she's too old for anyone to be interested in or distracted by. If you notice, this is just a speed coloring rather than a full speed paint. The reason for that is because there's a lot of details I had to do on this particular image, so the line work took me considerable amount of time, so I decided not to necessarily record it. I started off recording it, but then saw that the time just went way too slowly for me trying to get all the details right, because I'm actually extremely meticulous when I draw something. I like to get everything as perfect as I can. I also didn't want to have to speed it up to make it to the point where it's incomprehensible to watch. One thing I do kind of agree with feminists on is that you don't necessarily have to dress provocatively to get catcalls or creepy comments. I was once wearing a zip-up hoodie on the bus with the hoodie completely zipped up to the top, and I had an old drunk guy sit next to me and tell me I had great tits. Now, me being 15, I was in a total state of panic at that point because I didn't know what to do. If I would have known then what I know now, I would have just gotten the bus driver to kick him off the bus because he was clearly harassing me, but teenagers don't always think things through. Although where I'll disagree with them is I don't necessarily think that catcalling is a societal or systemic problem. I think it's just some individuals are assholes and they're going to do creepy stuff like that. I've been creeped out by many a person or customer, and I've met some very creepy people that regardless of what you'll wear, they'll blatantly stare at your chest. And I'm not talking a quick look, I mean that's all they'll do is obviously stare at you to the point where it actually makes you feel a little squeamish and you want to say something, but then I have issues about being rude to people to their face, even though the other person's clearly being rude. But, you know, there's people like that in this world, and I don't necessarily think there's a solution to it, because creepy people are going to be creepy. Now on to the next thing that slut-shaming can stand for. Other than what you wear, it's what you do, which would be promiscuity. Now, I don't necessarily believe that all men are praised for their promiscuity, but from my personal experience, it does seem like women are more shamed for it than guys particularly are. I would like to put it out there that the guys have their own particular issues when it comes to sexuality, such as people saying they're creeps, perverts, or a lot of guys I know get shamed for being a virgin up past a certain age. The biggest argument I hear against women who have a lot of sexual partners is that they're potentially spreading diseases. Well, that's not always the case, because I've actually met women who have had over 50 sexual partners who always use condoms and who have regular health checkups who have never had an STD. You can get an STD the first time you ever have sex if you have it unprotected. With the right precautions, you can have many sexual partners without too high of a risk of STDs as long as you always use a condom and always look out for certain signs and make sure you stay cautious. On the other side of things, I know a girl who contracted an STD from the second guy she ever slept with. She was actually in a long-term relationship with him. He ended up cheating on her and giving her a disease. It's actually rather tragic when you look at it. It also leads into another thing I've heard is people will say that people who have had a lot of sexual partners are more likely to cheat on you. I don't necessarily know if that's the case, because I don't see how someone's past sexual experience would hinder their ability to be trustworthy. One of the other complaints I've heard, if women have had a lot of sexual partners, it loosens them up, which is actually a misconception on how that particular area of the body works. The vagina is actually an extremely elastic part of the body, so there's not very much that can actually permanently loosen it. Childbirth will temporarily loosen it. However, usually it does not permanently loosen it unless, of course, you had multiples at one time. That can actually affect it in the long run. As we all know, the elasticity of your skin deteriorates with age. Unfortunately for the ladies, the same is true with their private parts. So as you age, your elasticity will actually decrease as well, with a complaint of looseness. So it's more of something that's affected by childbirth as well as age, rather than intercourse. The good thing about continuous intercourse is that it actually strengthens the pelvic floor muscles if you can get orgasms and things of that achieved. So a lot of women who actually have more sex will feel tighter because they have a stronger pelvic floor. Now, one of the reasons why some women who have had a lot of intercourse in the past might feel looser compared to women who haven't, another thing that will temporarily tighten you would be anxiety. Women who are more nervous will actually feel tighter, so a woman who is more used to this sort of situation might comparatively feel looser, but it's actually a good thing because that generally means she's enjoying it more. Another thing is that even women who have a lot of intercourse, some of them could just naturally have a weak pelvic floor muscle, because it's not just about vaginal elasticity, it also has a lot to do with your pelvic floor on how things feel down there. I also hate the analogy that a key that can open any lock is a valuable key, but a lock that is opened by any key is worthless. I think it's a little bit degrading towards men and women. I just find it a rather annoying saying. I know another argument against promiscuous women is that it's harder to prove your paternity if she actually does wind up pregnant. And I know paternity fraud is a real thing. Now, this is a point I don't want to automatically dismiss offhand. I do feel like it's more of a failure of the court system, as well as I wish that women like that would be more honest about the fact that they had many choices of sexual partners that could potentially be the father. Just there's a lot of shame and things like that involved on that particular side, but it's no excuse for a woman pinning paternity on someone who she's not sure of. So that is a valid point, but I think that it's got about as much probability as the STD argument. As long as you always wear a condom, the chances of that happening are greatly reduced. Not saying it's impossible though, because they say the only 100% sure way of not getting pregnant is abstinence, but that's a lot easier said than done. Because accidents do happen, one thing I do kind of have to say is an opinion of mine is I don't necessarily care how many sexual partners people have, but I think if you're going to have sex with someone, you should always have sex with someone you see yourself still getting along with in the future, so that if some sort of mishap happened, you know you have good emotional support as well as, if need be, someone who can help you raise a child if something like that happens. Not saying it's someone you have to live with or pick out curtains with, but at least someone you can be amicable with in the future. Now, I'm not of the opinion that you shouldn't sleep with someone unless you're planning to have a baby. It's more like when you're in a relationship or having casual sex with someone, you have to have that thought, if an accident did happen, like a condom broke or something happened to be beyond my control, what would happen? Would I be able to handle that situation with this person? And if the answer is no, you probably shouldn't be sleeping with them. Basically, I just wish people would keep in mind that that's always a potential possibility, no matter how careful you are. It might be a very slight possibility, but it's still a possibility. There's also a difference between people having a lot of sexual partners at once and people with a history of a lot of sexual partners, back on the topic of slut-shaming. Because I've met people who say they would never sleep with a girl with over blank many sexual partners, even if she's not sleeping with multiple at the time, which I find that kind of odd. Just because you never know why she has so many. She could have gone through a phase or whatnots, and if she has no STDs. Now, I'm not going to pull a Riley Dennis and say that you must sleep with this type of person or that type of person. And another thing is, if a person's managed to have so many sexual partners, they probably don't have too much of an issue finding dates, so I don't think they really need much help with that. I just find it a very strange standard personally, because it's not my standard really. One thing I do find that's rather hypocritical is people who have no problem with homosexuality or homosexual marriage who have an issue with people who are promiscuous. The classic argument for homosexual marriage or homosexuality in general is, I don't care what consenting adults do in their own bedroom. Can't the same thing be said for people who are wild or promiscuous? It just seems like a very strange double standard to me, and I absolutely despise double standards. One thing I find funny about the fact that slut-shaming seems to hold two different definitions is that the first definition seems to slut-shame the second definition. Because calling a girl a slut for how she's dressed is implying that being promiscuous or being a slut is a bad thing, which automatically shames the second definition of slut-shaming. One could argue that it's a sex-positive versus sex-negative type thing, but I've only ever really heard sex-positive feminists even use the term slut-shaming. It's odd, I see a lot of fighting between TERFs and intersectional feminists, but I don't see too much fighting between the sex-positives and sex-negatives, at least that I've witnessed, which is kind of interesting because sex-negative feminists seem to always want to slut-shame porn stars as well as strippers. So I would actually say that sex-negative feminists would probably be the worst slut-shamers out there. As well as another thing I've noticed is even if you look at both definitions of slut-shaming, it's mostly women doing all the shaming. I actually don't know too many men who mind promiscuous girls. I've met a couple, but from what I've noticed, it's mostly females who get angry about such things. It's mostly females who get angry about your clothing and whatnots. Even the anecdotes that I told earlier, mostly were women harassing me about what I wore. Men never have an issue with me. I don't want to completely dismiss it as an issue. It's a minor issue, but it is an issue. And it is mostly women who perpetuate it, but it is probably one of the only issues I actually agree with feminists on. Here's a bit of a challenge to you, my lovely viewers. Can any of you think of an issue that you actually agree with feminists on? Another question I'd like to ask is, do slut-shaming happen to men? I don't know if it does or not, to be honest, so I'd love to hear if you've ever actually experienced shaming of your clothing for it being too provocative or shaming on how many partners you've had. If you like my artwork, remember I am a freelance, so I could always make something custom for you. Hit me up on Twitter if you're interested. These were my thoughts. I hope you enjoyed. If you have any other thoughts you want to share with me, let me know in the comments down below. Check out my merchandise store, and I wish all of you a pleasant rest of your day.